Touchdown, Chargers! Welcome to Chargers Weekly. Daniel Popper, kind enough to join us, so you can follow him on X or Instagram or read him at The Athletic. We say it every time he joins us. Best of the best. And love The Athletic, love all their content. Popper's awesome in his coverage of the Chargers, and you build that out to Robert Mays and all the guys that are covering football, and it really is a must-have for any football fan. Pops, I'll let you promote the other stuff. Hops with Pop. I know you got a Substack rolling, so why don't you just kind of push that immediately and make sure the folks that are tuning in know where they can find you.
Always so nice money when I come on the show. But yeah, got a Substack rolling, hopswithpop.substack.com. Streaming weekly, doing our live streams. You can get my podcast anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple. So we do the live streams and they populate onto the podcast streaming services. You can rewatch the video on Substack. I got a chat going on the Substack that I'm pretty active in, answering questions. Just put up a video the other day breaking down film of first-round pick Omarion Hampton. So got a lot of cool stuff going on over there, and would obviously appreciate everyone heading over there to listen, to watch, and to hang out with me in the chat.
Why don't we start with kind of there's really not a lot going on, but there is phase 2 going on. Have you learned anything since the draft about this team, signings, non-signings, depth, the fact that they added a wide receiver on a rookie tryout in Campbell, just kind of what's happening in the Daniel Popper eyes as you look at the Chargers?
Yeah, so out at phase 2 practice earlier this week, just kind of moseying about the sideline, looking at guys. You know, one big thing was like this whole Zion Johnson to center thing I've been talking about since February. Was an idea, and now we saw it in practice, or at least I did for the first time on Tuesday with him actually snapping balls to Justin Herbert. I'm fascinated to see what happens there as far as his transition, if their idea of what they think is going to happen actually materializes, what happens on the interior. Mekhi Becton is really big. That's another thing that jumps
Large
out.
Individual.
And, you know, obviously, you know, my mind always goes to the offensive line first, but, you know, you start envisioning Mekhi Becton and Joe Alt double teaming defensive linemen on the right side of that line in the run game, and your imagination starts to run wild a little bit. And then you look at these receivers, man, you know, you see Justin Herbert throwing routes against air, you know, to a couple of these rookies. You look at Oronde Gadsden, their 5th-round pick. You know, you look at all these explosive pieces they added to the offense, and you start thinking about, okay, like how different is this going to look this year compared to last year when it was basically the Ladd McConkey show and right, not much else. You know, how is Justin Herbert going to be able to attack downfield, which, you know, when we've seen him at his best, that's it. You know, it's really being able to attack with players who can access the deep part of the field. And then, you know, Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh have said it, but you see the defensive linemen out there. You see that group working with defensive line coach Mike Elston, and they are big and they are deep. And I'm really curious to see among that group, like who really like takes over and becomes the guy. You know, obviously that, you know, we had the same kind of questions heading into last year, and it was ended up being Poona Ford. But you could tell me, you know, 5 different guys that become sort of like the guy in that group who, you know, is getting the most playing time, producing the most. It could be Tier Tart, could be Jamari Caldwell, it could be, you know, you could tell me it could be Deshaun Hand. You know, I really like the way that he played on film for Miami against the run. So just a few things there, but yeah, just kind of, you look around the practice field and you're like, all right, looks a little bit different, but you know, there's a lot of potential, you know, in some of these groups with the moves that they've made and how they've sort of restructured the roster.
Yeah, I think kind of the one thing with this particular regime or iteration of Chargers football now, and it's not going into its 9th year here in Los Angeles, that I feel with this particular team is just depth. I feel like there's a lot of depth out there. You know, is it blue chips? Don't know. I mean, you know, it's hard to say that. Yeah, there's blue chips out there right now. You know, but Poona Ford turned into a blue chip player. You know, on a low money deal, and I look at it and it's just like, wow. There's so much depth that you're going to have a hell of a time. We always have fun doing the 53 Popper. I think the 53s, is it 4 running backs? Is it 7 wide receivers? Is it 4 tight ends? Is it 5 tight ends? If you include a fullback, you know, there's a lot of different, I guess, ways that this roster could be constructed based on how they want to play and the amount of players that they've kind of thrown into this mix. Save one group, like the one group that I look at and I'm like, wow, it's O-line. And it's like you just kind of think about what's behind that, if it's going to be the same starting front, plus Mekhi Becton and Trey as your swing, I kind of look at what's behind that, and that's the one where I circle, and I'm like, okay, I could see them maybe keeping an eye on cuts and guys that are performing somewhere else. But otherwise, tell me if you feel like I'm missing something here. I feel pretty good just based on sort of the money they gave Dante Jackson. And, it's not a lot, but it's enough to suggest, okay, they think he's going to be a viable contributor to this team. And St. Juice just kind of fits what they like, and I think he's a traitsy guy that they like. And they're like, yeah, give this guy to Clink and you'll see him take the step. So for me, if there's one position that I look at, it's that one. It's like, wow, I could see them looking for a better interior backup offensive lineman in case Becton, who has an injury history, something happens there, or with Zion or with Bozeman. I think everybody's kind of talking a little bit now about Andre James, and maybe there were some, that the fall off last year wasn't necessarily because of the offense, but there could be an issue, medically that he was dealing with, and you wonder whether or not he's past that. So to me, that's the one position group that I'm looking at, and I'm like, okay, who's still out there? Who can they get for that bargain or that late day 3 pick that they could, the Elijah Molden deals that they were making that they could go out and scoop up to just kind of help that particular room out a little bit.
Yeah, I think it sort of speaks to the depth that's the position group you bring up, and I agree with you. But like, if you're sixth offensive lineman, and Trey Pipkins has started, 40-something games in the league.
Yeah.
Your seventh offensive lineman, Jamari Salyer, has started at 2 different positions over a full season. So it could be a lot worse. Like, trust me, you and I have both covered this team long enough to know that you could be in a much, much worse position on your offensive line than they are in. But I do agree with you. And that's probably my biggest question, heading into OTAs and heading into, training camp. How does this work out? Right. And you can even throw Andre James in there. I mean, Andre James has started 60 games, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's like, okay, how does this work out? When the pads come on, what does Zion Johnson look like at center? Is that actually going to work out? How does left guard shake out? Like, is Branson Taylor a guy that we are overlooking here as somebody who could potentially play left guard? I don't know. They're trying him there right now. It's all an idea right now. With that group specifically, it's like, you don't really know what you have until those pads come on and you start seeing these guys actually work and play through contact and all of that kind of stuff. But, I've been saying it for months at this point. Like, I felt like they probably needed 2 new starters on the interior to really get this thing to a place where they could play the way that Jim Harbaugh wants to play. Right now, it's looking like 1 new starter, and there are guys still out there, right? Like on the free agent market that potentially could come in.
Will Hernandez,
right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And if you're saying competitors welcome, like, you want right now, it could be 3 guys battling at center and 4 guys battling at left guard. Like, why not more? Right? Like,
yeah. I think the one thing it also tells you, Pop, and this is like, there's not a lot of offensive linemen out there, man. You can find yourself D linemen, you can find edge rushers, you can find DPRs, and is it easy? No, but you can. Those guys, I feel like you have a better opportunity to find them than you do O linemen. When people, and I'm talking about high level, when teams find high level O linemen, unless they're the Houston Texans, they keep them, and those guys just rarely make the market. And so that's sort of the one thing that I'm anxious to see how this Slater deal is going to be squared away, because you and I have talked about this for years now, and just how the number keeps going up and up and up. And I don't know how that reconciles with this front office, where it could have been 28 last year, and now it's, I would imagine, north of 30 based on his agent and what his agent wants. And if you're representing these guys and he's an all pro, and it's just, and look, I've done this before, man. I have done this dance with Derwin. I've done it with Bosa. I've done it with Herbert. And ultimately it gets done. We talked to Joe Ortiz last week, and he said all the right things. He's like, come on, man. Of course we're going to get Slater back. There's no doubt about it. It's just, working through it. But I just kind of look at it through that financial lens of, man, this deal got a lot more expensive. I would imagine from Rashawn's side, from his agent's side, that this deal, with the jump in the cap, with the non-quarterback pay, percentage of cap that non-quarterbacks are getting now at edge and at, with Myles Garrett, and at wide receiver with Chase, I think it's going to be a little bit tougher than maybe some people are thinking.
Well, here's what I'd say about that. it takes two to make a deal. So Rashawn Slater in his camp also would have had to want to make a deal last year versus betting on him and knowing that there were deals that were going to get done and knowing that if he played well and entered this offseason without a contract extension, that he would probably make more money. So I think that's part of it.
Right.
But ultimately, like you said, you mentioned those guys, like all of those deals went either right up to the edge of training camp. In Derwin's case, it went to August 17th. I looked this up, the timing of all this stuff. Yeah. Even like Keenan's extension went right up until like Labor Day when he signed that was the third contract. The other guys are obviously second contracts. And like, yeah, it's a new front office, but Ed McGuire is still negotiating the contracts and it's the same ownership. And so like, this is sort of the process, they're going to negotiate. Right. And like at this point, maybe it's like still a little bit early, but as it gets towards training camp, like the number is the number. At that point, you're negotiating over like the minutia of the contract, and like the agents are trying to get the absolute best deal for their clients. And then when they come to the table again, or they're trying to get new clients, they can point to things that they were able to negotiate. So I the way this has always happened historically, like my guess is it's like report day before report day. Maybe it extends into training camp like it did with Derwin, but that deal was like the Derwin deal was basically done. It was 2 weeks of like haggling over like the minutia of the contract. And then, but Derwin was at practice and like eventually it gets done. And it becomes like a total afterthought, by the start of the regular season. So it makes sense. And at the end of the day, like the market is the market. Like if you have a left tackle that is an elite player, like you're going to pay him a certain amount of money. It's not like they're going to get some huge discount here because they're playing, tough at the negotiating table.
Not when he's an all-pro. Not when he's an all-pro left tackle. It's just exactly.
Right. And also the way you want to play. Like when your run game coordinator, Andy Bischoff, comes out in his first press conference and he says, we have an O-line centric building, and you have an elite left tackle and you don't pay him top of the market. Like those two things don't line up, So ultimately, like if you're going to be a physical dominant line of scrimmage team, like you better be paying your elite offensive linemen, like their elite offensive linemen based on what the market is telling you.
And I think it also sends a signal to your first round top 5 pick from last year. Like, we appreciate you. This is an O-line, tip of the spear. O-line is a weapon. Play physical football. Like, it just, like you said, it runs in step with everything that's been messaged by this front office, this coaching staff, of how they want to build a team. So for me, it's, and there's no scar tissue there, right? This is my 9th year. I've never once had a contract issue lead to a trade going into a season because they weren't able to resolve it. So, on that front, it's not like I have anything that I can point to say, yeah, I'm just worried about this thing happening again. And I just haven't seen that, I mean, I guess you could say Keenan from last year when he refused to take a pay cut, but that was totally understandable. I think based on, that Joey and Khalil took a pay cut, that they were $30 million over the cap, and you couldn't bring that guy back not taking a pay cut when the other two guys did. That was a little bit different.
I thought that situation probably could have been handled differently from Keenan's side. I think the one thing I will bring up
from that side.
Yeah.
Yes.
The one thing I could bring up with Rashawn though is like you do wonder if the injury stuff is factoring into this negotiation, right? Missed all of 22, had a bit of a down year in 23 as he was battling ankle issues, had the pec injury last year. Obviously he was able to play through it, but you do wonder if that does, factor into sort of the thought process there. And obviously, like, it's a cold business. When you get to the negotiating table, like everything becomes a thing that you're talking about. So I was wondering.
See, if I were in his camp, my pushback on that would be you know what? A lot of other guys would sit out. They would sit out. But Rashawn is a freaking psycho and a warrior, and 100%. He's all about protecting Justin Herbert, and that's why he was out there. But you're right. It's like, what's the value? And then you just kind of look at, when you're trying to read these tea leaves and you look at Baltimore and you look at their offensive linemen, particularly tackles, they like giants. They like these massive human beings, and Joe Alt and Mekhi Becton. And look, that's why the Chargers were able to draft Rashawn Slater, because there were people that were concerned about the size, about the length, and all he is just the best technician in football. And once he gets his hands on you, it is absolutely over.
Just watch the film. I don't care about his size. Just go watch the film. Like if they're having questions about that because he doesn't fit a certain profile, just go watch the film.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to know.
Exactly. I don't want to. It's a waste of my time.
Yeah,
Your time.
yeah.
But here, I am actually segueing into something else, and that is these first 3 games of the season, and why I'm like, okay, this has got to get figured out in training camp. Like, this is not we got to, because it's Chris Jones and the Chiefs, it's Christian Wilkins and the Raiders, it's that front of that front 7 of Denver that's going to be coming after that interior line, and they're all division games. And I mean, when you look at that, at what the Broncos did this offseason, and DJ Jones and Cooper and Greenlaw and Allen, like, it is I don't want to say no name, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not that splash, but man, that's a good front. And that O-line is going to be tested. Like, you're Zion Johnson and you got freaking Chris Jones lining up over you and you're trying center for the first time in a game. That's what I'm talking about on this particular position group.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you. Like, and I went into the offseason feeling like they were going to be aggressive in trying to fix this because it was bad in Houston. Like, if you want to point to one thing that went wrong there, go 9 plays into the game and you'll see, Zion and Bradley Bozeman, unable to pick up a stunt in the interior, leading to, pressure. So, I'm with you. I think, like, from their eyes, like, if Mekhi Becton is playing at the level he was playing for with the Eagles and he's on the field and he's available, the idea is that he's going to elevate everybody.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair. I don't really have any questions about, like, what Mekhi Becton can be. I think you could probably ask the question, like, okay, how much of it was Jeff Stoutland, the Eagles offensive line coach? Is he going to continue to play at that level? But if he's on the field, I think he's going to be a very clear upgrade at the position. To me, it's like, how many games are you going to get out of him? Because you talk to some people around the league and they look at what happened with the Eagles and they're like, that's the aberration. Like, getting 18 games out of that guy between the regular season and the playoffs. Like, is he going to be able to do that? Now, he did play 16 games the year before with the Jets, and maybe he's put this stuff behind him. But, like, we've gone down this road before, where you feel like the Chargers go out in free agency and they fix a problem with an injury, a player with an injury history. Like, Brian Bulaga is a great example. Like, boom, sign Brian Bulaga,
immediately injured,
right tackle set, and we got hurt in the first game of the season.
Oh yeah,
and then all of a sudden,
retirement contract.
And then it's all of a sudden you're on Storm Norton, and it's like it's not good, So, but that's it's a good problem to have. Like, there's been years past where you're talking specifically about, like, okay, the starters are not good enough, but now it's like, okay, do you have enough contingencies? And they do have players that have played, but I'm 100% with you. Like, that is my focus, is like, what happens at center? What happens at left guard? How much do you get on Mekhi Becton? And have they done enough here to improve what was the biggest weakness of the team last year, in my opinion? And we're going to find out, like you said, right away, and I love what the Broncos did. Like, this offseason,
it was probably the best off season in football. I think when you now look, Dre Greenlaw's on the wrong side of 30. He's coming off a serious injury. They gave him $30 million. They're risks when you make these sort of deals, but I think they clearly had positions they wanted to address. They wanted that stretch, the field athletic tight end. They got it in Evan Ingram. They wanted some juice in the backfield. They got it in RJ Harvey. They wanted to provide depth on that front. It's like everything. And then what do? They make arguably one of the strongest rooms in the NFL even stronger with Jahdae Barron. Like, it's just,
love that pick.
Yeah, it's the one thing about the Broncos is, and I know it's I can't say why, but I don't know about Bo Nix yet. I know I shouldn't say. I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I'm buying it yet. If I'm really buying it just yet. And there's no reason for it other than, it was pretty clunky for a handful of games there. It was really good looking for a couple games there. I'm just not quite sure.
Yeah, it was clunky until he played the Chargers that first time and almost let him back in the
started running around.
Yeah. How many times did that happen to the Chargers, by the way? Bo Nix turns his season around against the Chargers. They obviously win the game, but like, they couldn't keep him in the pocket that far. Yeah. Remember Jordan Love?
Jordan Love
was like potentially going to be out of the league.
And it was one half. It was the second half of that game where just busted coverage after busted coverage. And palms in the air, and we're
Yep.
flying home from Green Bay on the charter going, the hell was that? Like, what the
I've
hell did we
literally
just
had
watch?
players in the Chargers locker room ask me, like, did we just like make that guy's career? And I was like, maybe. I remember like at the halftime of that game at Lambeau, I remember having a conversation with Matt Schneidman, who covers the Packers for us. And I'm really like, are they sure about this guy? Like, really talking about Jordan Love after the first half, right? The second half happens, he leads him back, and then, the rest is history, playoff run, etc. So, but
I
yeah,
think
I
going
mean,
back, I'm
yeah,
sorry, Pop. I was going to say, if you have something to add, I was going to say, just kind of going back to the O-line, I think it's also, a signal from the front office and the running backs they now have populating that room, and I think even you hear the way they talk about Raheem Sanders, and here's another guy that's 220, 225 pounds, they're all 220 plus. I mean, Najee's 240 for God's sake. So it's clear there's this shift and they want these guys going this way and not this way. And that's something we just did not see enough of last year.
Yeah. Yeah. The running back room is really solid. I mean, I think I know there are sections of the fan base that were like running back at 22, and Omarion Hampton is going to be a fan favorite by week 2. Like, he's going to have one run in the opening game of the season where he just trucks a safety, and people are, and by week 3, there's going to be Omarion Hampton jerseys everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, I'm very confident that this guy is going to be a difference making player. And, you talk about last year, right? Like, they did catch lightning in a bottle a little bit with J.K. Dobbins, but, he misses that big stretch of the season. He played 13 games, but those 4 games he missed were really big. Gus Edwards was battling injuries. They didn't really have the two-headed monster that they were hoping for when they signed Gus and JK last year, nor did they really have that consistency. But I love the way this room is fitting together. Like, Najee Harris, they bring in, he is what he is. Like, is he a home run hitter? No. But sometimes you need guys that are contact hitters, that are doubles hitters, that you can hand off the ball and they're going to go get what's blocked for them. And they're going to play with a certain level of physicality, and they're going to be on the field every week. Like, it's going to be 17 games, durability, toughness. That's important. And then you go out and get an explosive guy like Omarion Hampton. And now it's not like Omarion Hampton has to come in and be the number 1 back right away. Like, he can hand it off to Najee Harris, and Omarion Hampton has time, but it's a different looking backfield. And I think it's all geared towards getting this offense to play within the philosophy of Jim Harbaugh. Like, you want to be able to physically dominate. And is the offensive line there? We'll see. I think if Mekhi Becton can stay on the field, that right side is pretty solid.
And
but
that's
I think
what's been missing, right? Like, they've never been able to run right. Like, we've been like, why aren't you running left more? And that is the one thing, Zion and Rashawn did a pretty good job of blocking it up in the run game. And you saw production to that side. And then even last year, I know we were just scratching our heads like, why can't they run right? Like, what is going on with this team? And now with that pair, that could certainly dramatically change this offense and get some defensive linemen on their heels instead of on their toes so much, which we've seen for the last, it feels like 3-4 years.
Yeah. Well, the first question was, why can't they run right? And then later in the season is, why are they still running right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Pardon the pun. Yeah. Go the
exactly.
other way.
Yeah. So, you feel like the run game is going to be improved just because of what the backfield is. Omarion Hampton is a guy that's going to be able to make something out of nothing in a big way very consistently. JK did it at times last year, but it's, Omarion Hampton's going to present a completely different animal, I think, in that regard. So I love what they've done with the running back room. But, going back to something you said earlier that I thought was a good point, it's a deep roster. I give them a lot of credit for building a deep roster, but where are those blue chips? I think that's the big question. And they're going to need guys to step up into those positions, right? Like, I think you even look at edge rusher. Like, last year, it was the strength of the defense, and they built the defense around the edge rushers. Now you lose Joey Bosa. You still feel like Khalil Mack can be a high level player, but he's 34. Who's stepping up in that room? Like, Tuli Tuipulotu is going to be, starting player.
Would you have him ranked, Popper on The Athletic? Another reason why you should subscribe. 22 number 1 most important players for the upcoming Charger season. Where'd you put Tuli? Because I would assume he's the top 10, right?
Yeah, he's fringe 11.
Yeah, there you go.
So I mean, me, I had 4 offensive linemen in the top 10 because I'm a psycho. But I mean, I've watched enough football in my life to know, that's how you win football games.
Yeah, I mean, we watched it in Houston. Why it did, but Tuli to me is And I read it. I didn't want to make it sound like I didn't. I read the articles. They're great, but I just remember him kind of being right there and me saying, yeah, like Tuli's gotta, this is Tuli's time now. You're now the guy. It's you and Khalil, and we've seen those flashes. And was it November or October last year where he had the wild production for a month? Like, let's see it, man, because it feels like it's in there.
Yeah. So I wonder with Tuli, like, because some people have brought this up to me, like, do you think, if he becomes a starter and he's not playing, 300 to 400 special team snaps,
Yeah.
does that impact, his production? Because I think if they can find other
Yeah.
players, if Kyle Kennard takes over, for example, his special team snaps,
and it makes sense that he would, right, based on how he's built in the profile. I mean, he looks like Chris Rumpf kind of, sort of deal, right?
A little bigger.
Yeah. Well, you could say that for just about anybody. Sorry, Chris. I love you, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I wonder, obviously he has this opportunity to take over this number 2 role and be a starter. Can they afford to take some special teams off his plate so that he's fresher on defense? And what does that mean for, his production? And, obviously, like, he produced last year. I don't know if I think it was 8.5 sacks, 9 sacks, something like that.
Yeah. I
don't think he really played at that level consistently. I actually thought his tape was better as a rookie than a second-year player, but I could see an argument otherwise. So, can you get the consistent down to down, pass rush productivity from him with an increased role on defense and maybe taking some of that special teams off his plate with other younger players moving into that role?
I mean, geez, poor Ryan Ficken, man. Just his special teams got absolutely raided this offseason. But I think also credit to Joe Ortiz is, you bring Troy Dye back and it looked like a lot of these picks, especially Mickens and Bridges and Kennard, like it feels like, okay, I can see, these guys absolutely fit that profile. Dean Leonard's still on the team. Ja Taylor, I believe, they're up there, both still on the team. So at least you still have some core 4 stalwarts, out there that can help. I think, a guy that I could totally see being one of those core 4 guys, and it's just such fun tape to watch, the splash plays, is Steve-O Klotz, mean, that guy's got Ryan Ficken written all over him, is like probably his favorite player that we're going to see when these OTAs and training camp gets rolling.
Yeah. I don't know if he's going to make the 53, but that's a guy to circle for the practice squad that's going to get an elevation in like week 6 and play a bunch of special team snaps. I loved his film.
It's
like
the best.
He's not like a big dude, but he just gets after it in the run game. And now you understand why like Jim is bringing up Steve-O Klotz in his press conference when you go watch his tape, because he can line up at H-back, tight end, fullback, and he gets downhill and he gets after people in the run game. So like, he's a guy absolutely you could see called up and make an impact on special teams in the game middle of the season when they're battling some injuries and, maybe play 10 to 12 snaps on offense. But I mean, that's the life, going back to Ryan Ficken, that's the life of a special teams coach, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's every year you got turnover and you're piecing it together and you're getting young guys that, oh yeah, I played a ton of special teams in college, and then they come in and they're raw and you got to, right. And you got to figure it out. And, that's why I think, I think it's unfortunate that special teams coaches do get looked over a little bit when you're talking about, head coaching hirings and interviews and stuff like that. Like, there's no coach outside of the head coach on the roster that has to be more familiar with the entire roster than special teams coaches, because they have to look under every rock and every nook and cranny to find guys that they think can play consistent football for them. And Ryan Ficken has done a really good job. But I think that was a little bit of a part of what happened last year, especially on the punt unit. I don't think J.K. Scott had a good season, but there were so many pieces rotating through there, guys off the practice squad and waivers and, and they had so many injuries there early in the season between Ja and Dean Leonard had a hamstring and Nick Neiman, missed the first 4 games of the season. So it's going to be interesting to see like how some of these young guys, some of these rookies, impact special teams, because ultimately, like, it does matter when obviously the plays themselves, but we're talking about Tuli, right? Like, if they're going to take special team snaps off his plate, somebody has to take those on, and they have to be close to as good as Tuli is, right?
So really good.
Right. So, and if they don't have somebody that can take those snaps, then all of a sudden Tuli has to play 350 special team snaps. And then you wonder how that affects his defense. So it all sort of pairs together. But I did want to say that special teams coaches deserve a little bit more love.
And then you're going, let's see, I'm just going to kind of go into the who's still available in the edge market out there. Von Miller. You want a 36-year-old Von Miller who made $20 million. Matt Judon, I know we've talked about him before. Za'Darius Smith, Preston Smith, Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, there's still guys out there, and I think that may be that's something probably to keep an eye on.
And go with 5.
I think if Ficken's like, hey, dude, these guys aren't ready. We got to keep Tuli out there, and then you just kind of take a little bit off his plate, and you can go pluck like they did with Bud. Would they give him $9 million a year? I think kind of a little bit later in that second.
It was less than that.
Agency.
Yeah, I think it was about. Yeah. I think it was total $9 million. It was 2 years, $9 million. So it was like about 4.5. That's what it was.
Yeah, 2 years, $9 million. So that's
interesting thought.
That could make sense if it's not working. The one, just kind of speaking to that, the Steve O'Klotz and like the back end there, like so many people when they signed him as a priority undrafted free agent were like, oh, Raheem Sanders. And I was like, slow down. You got Hassan Haskins as a special team stalwart and short yardage back. He's making the team. You just drafted Hampton. You got Najee Harris. They just drafted Kamani Vidal last year. And then I started watching a little bit more Raheem Sanders. And then I started listening to the coach. And then we talked to Joe Ortiz last week. And you just saw his face light up when he was talking about, I was at the South Carolina game when we were in Charlotte. And I busted this run. And I was like, and I'm like, okay. I think this guy might be pushing. If they feel like he can fill that role with a little more explosiveness, then I just think Haskins to me was one of the more underappreciated players last year because of how much he did on special teams and pass pro. And when he had to be a fullback, he was a fullback. There was just a lot there. And I was like, I can't see them moving on from him.
Yeah. If you're a running back trying to make it in the league, go look at Hassan Haskins.
Yeah.
And if you can play that style and you can play a ton on special teams and you can tackle and you can be athletic and physical in that phase, you're going to make a lot of rosters as a third running back because you just need that flex.
Right.
You need that flex deeper in your running back room. And so I agree. I think the spot to watch is the 4th running back spot, depending on how the roster shakes out. But, it's a big, big offseason for Kamani Vidal.
Huge.
Like that's one, like the linebacker versus running back one-on-one pass protection drills, those periods during training camp, I will be watching very closely because he obviously has some juice. He caught that touchdown pass,
the first play.
The issue is like, can he get to the NFL level in terms of pass protection? Because he had a really rough game against the Bucs, and it makes you sort of scratch your head and say like, okay, there's a long way to go there with a full off season. How does he look in terms of being able to take on linebackers from a physical standpoint, but also identification, things of that standpoint?
That's the key right there to me is that he's got to see it. It was just, it felt a little bit slower than a tick slow last year and got to the point where, dangerous. And so that'll, fourth running back versus 7th wide receiver is I know they did it out of training camp last year with Brendan Rice. I just can't see it this year.
I'll never forget that money. I'll never forget that.
Yeah,
I'll never forget that.
That's right. Did we talk you out of it?
Yes.
Yes, I talked you out of it. I was like, they're not carrying 7 wide receivers. You're crazy, Pop.
Where were we? It was the last. It was the last preseason.
We were in the booth. Yeah, we were at SoFi.
I did my annual. Yeah, I did my annual.
Or were we in Dallas? Were we in Dallas or were we?
Honestly, I can't remember exactly where we were. But we were in the booth for the final preseason game. I was like set. I had my 53 set. I was like, I'm going 7 receivers. Yeah. No one's going to convince me otherwise. Yeah. I'm taking the best 53. These 7 receivers have all earned a spot. I had my logic was all ironed out, and I went in and DJ was like, no shot. I'm like, shot. Well, damn, like this guy worked with Joe.
Yeah.
He's got to know. And then I got moved off my spot, and it'll never happen again.
Yeah. What you put Tremont Morris-Brash in there, I think, instead as the extra edge, or I can't remember.
I did something that I regret.
I'm going to say it again. I don't think they carry 7 out of. I just don't. I don't see it. It's it's the 2 rookies. It's Mike Williams, Quentin. Obviously Ladd, and figure it out, man.
I have 6 right now. So I have my running 53 going already because, again, I'm a psycho. So I've already – because it's just a good way. It's good to get the process started early. So just so you can see, like, okay, where are the pressure points, like where the competition is sort of going to be shaping up. So I have 6 right now. Ladd, Trey, Harris, KLS, Mike
Davis.
Williams, Darius, and then I have Quentin in right now. But like, this is a big offseason for Quentin too.
Yeah,
like they took 2 guys that can play your position. You know, like in theory, if you put Mike at X, like it could be Trey Harris at Z, could be KLS at Z, right?
Yeah.
So and Quentin can't play X. Like it's not going to happen at this point.
I think it's clear based on who they signed and who they drafted. And then you look at the tryout, like I said, the fact that they then signed, Dale Von Campbell, who's another 6'4", 205-pound outside receiver. It's like clearly there was a type, there was speed and there was size, and there were guys that played X in college. And so I think you're right. Like, it's for Quentin, I feel like I always feel bad talking about it because by all accounts, great guy, hard worker, all of those things. And typically that when you're a first round pick, that goes a long way. You're not a jerk. You're not, you're not complaining. You're not slacking, trying to get better. It's just those, you have the Raider game in week 18, right? And then you have the playoff game, and it's like, which is it? So
yeah.
I struggle because I look at tight end and I see, obviously 4, and, with Disley, Conklin, Gadsden, and Fisk, all 4 of those guys are making it. And,
yeah, I mean, you could like potentially stash Fisk on the practice squad.
I just thought he was good.
He was 100%. He was good, but it's just how many teams in the league are looking for that skill set,
Right.
And maybe more than in the past because teams are starting to run the ball a little bit more, but.
Right. And then it comes down to Matlock and that development, and they've invested so much there. And the idea that they're just going to be like, yeah, well, Fisk can fill that role, and that's how you save that spot there. But it just feels like, between how coaches talked about him and how much they've invested in trying to get him to be a fullback, and the fact that he did gradually get better week after week toward the end of the year, it would feel weird that they would just kind of throw that aside. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, the flexibility is great, right? You stash him on the roster, and you can play him at defensive tackle, and he'll give you functional play. You can play him on offense, and he'll give you functional play.
Right.
Even can play on special teams. He's playing on the kick return unit last year with the new kickoff rule. So,
right.
I am curious though. Like, is it going to be the same role as last year, or if he's on the roster, is it going to be like an offense
fullback
only?
I mean, what do they say? They preach it all the time with every position, right? Just flexibility. How much flexibility means for them, and the fact that, like you heard Jesse Minter talk about it with corners, with safeties. I want my best 5 on the field. I don't care what position they're playing. I want them on the field. And you heard that with offensive line. Well, we think Zion can play center. Bradley can play guard. We love the flexibility of Trey. And it's like, it's a team that preaches that all the time. And so, Matlock, I know it's a little bit different, but yeah, between special team snaps, offense snaps, I mean, you can get worn down pretty quickly there. It'll be interesting to see if he is going to be a full-time fullback and if they're going to run those packages all the time, like it felt like they did last year with this bigger backfield. It's way too early to go through the 53. I didn't mean to take that direction here, but it just gets fun doing it.
I love it.
I know.
Love it.
We talk about it all the time. I'm sure you already have your preliminary 53 sitting in front of you that you're constantly moving.
Oh, I do. Well, it's 54 right now, just because I haven't like narrowed it down, but I do have like a running just because I want to see like, okay, where if we're going to be making decisions here, like what are the decisions? I'm really curious about like the corner room, how the corner room.
That's what it's funny. I was just looking at that as we're talking. I've got it here in front of me. And, the one name that obviously jumps out, and again, sorry, Ryan Fickett, it's Ja Taylor, right? It's like, where does Ja fit into this when it felt like he kind of lost his position last year and kind of took a step back on the depth chart after being given an opportunity. The weird thing for me last year was just that we didn't see more Dean Leonard. Based on sort of what we saw from him in camp and in some of those preseason games, that he wasn't a guy that got some more reps.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I loved what I saw from Dean Leonard, specifically in the preseason games. He made a couple plays that were really, really impressive. So, I mean, here's the thing with Ja. He had a pretty significant injury in week 1 of last year, and he played through it. Yeah. And you got to give him credit for playing through it. A lot of guys would not have played through the injury that he had. And I think that really affected, how he was able to play. You saw he was in and out. Yeah. Constantly getting worked on the sideline. I was expecting a big jump from him, and I think the injury kind of derailed his season. But I think when you talk about Ja, specifically with this year's 53, this year's roster, he can play well in the slot. He showed us that he can play well at nickel, and I think you kind of need that with the way the room is set up right now. Obviously, Derwin's going to be playing a lot in the slot, but after Derwin, it's Tarheeb.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, where's your depth there? Which is why I think, Ja could potentially have a route to 53, because you look at the rest of the guys. Cam Hart outside only. Dante Jackson is an outside guy. Benjamin St-Juste outside. Dean Leonard outside. Tarheeb can obviously play both. Ja has played both, but has played his better football as a nickel player. So that would be my only reason. They do have some of these undrafted free agents that project as potential nickel guys.
Yeah.
But that would be my only point on Ja Taylor.
Yeah. And again, I think you said it, and everybody really picked on him last year, and it's not fair. He easily could have just said, I can't do it, and not been out there and avoided all of that. The defensive line group, again, I feel like that's pretty settled. I can't imagine them, unless it's the whole special teams thing with Tuli. I don't think there's an interior D lineman that they're going to go pluck, if he gets cut somewhere. I feel like they're kind of settled there. We've heard a lot about Aboigbe and putting on that 20 pounds of muscle, and we were told he was a developmental player last year, and not to, that this is someone who's raw and Elston's going to work with him and have some patience. And, by all accounts, that's exactly how it played out. And I mean, you saw him, you're out there at phase 2. Does he look a lot different than he did last year?
He looks bigger, but
yeah,
we'll see when the pads come on.
Exactly.
That's sort of where I'm at. But, I think it's like, I guess the point I would make is, like, in the past, when we talked through the roster like this at this stage, under previous regimes, you're talking about, like, okay, this guy has to make a jump. Like, this guy is starting, and if he doesn't make a jump, they have nothing behind him. What I appreciate about what this regime does is you have so many contingencies built in where, like, if Justin Aboigbe makes a jump, great. If he doesn't, you have other options as far as guys that can play, which I think is the big difference that I see between how these two regimes approach roster building.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. It's Naquan Jones, it's Deshaun Hand. Obviously, we saw Tier Tart was a, rotational, get him in there on passing downs only player. And man, he just flashed. He's just like, get that guy more snaps. And same thing with Puna, the way, the thought going into the season when he was signed of what he might be compared to what he became. One of the things that was interesting with the conversation that we had with Coach Minter was, him saying, the fact that everybody wants to pigeonhole us as a zone D, it's just who we had. He's like, I would much rather be able to play more man.
It's still who they have, though.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the the St-Juste, the traits based kind of idea of, can you get these big bridges as a traits sort of guy? Can you coach them up to a point where we saw them coach up two guys? And, look, Cam Hart played really well on the outside when he was healthy. And I did not see that on that Notre Dame film at all. Like, I was
key part of that statement, though, is when healthy.
Right. And but I'm speaking to the coaching when they're giving a guy with these sort of traits and like, hey, we can coach them into this, and we can. But you're right. I mean, I don't see a press man, put him on the island and we're good. We can kind of take everything else and worry about it. I don't see that on this team.
Yeah, but it's also like, I mean, you're also obviously you're playing into what you have, but like Tarheeb still, like, he's going to be at his best when he's playing in a lot of zone coverage. Like, he's very an instinctive player, great when he can see it and drive down. So yeah, I get where he's coming from. I mean, I think every defensive coordinator would love, 2 all-pro corners on the outside, and you play man all the time.
Yeah,
but
free everybody up.
Right. But I think, like, the way that, like, I don't think the room is different this year where they're all of a sudden going to be playing a ton of man coverage.
No, that would have to be something that gets plucked. And again, premium position, rarely do those guys become available. And you're not going to, like you said, go out and find a guy that you're comfortable putting out there on an island and changing the way you play. The one thing that and I should do a better job of pushing your top 20, because I believe he was in there if I remember right. But Junior Colson is a big, he's a huge X factor because of what Daiyan did. And I was having this conversation with Lo Neal this week, just how it's funny that you look at how much money some of these off-ball linebackers got because the market was so thin, and you're like, damn, they got that, that kind of scratch. And here the Chargers could go into this season with arguably the best room in the league if Colson's what we think he could become, and Daiyan takes that step to Pro Bowl, All-Pro level. It could really end up being the strength of this defense.
Yeah, so I had both of those guys in my top 20. I had Daiyan at number 6. I just kept inching him up. Like, I think I had him at 10, but I'm just like, man, there's so much left in the tank for him. Like, he was really good last year, but you think about some of those ops he had for, interceptions, sacks, like the sack, like if he makes that sack on Patrick Mahomes against the Chiefs late in the season, right, on the final play, like, he played really, really well. But if he starts making some of these plays that were on the table for him, what level can he get to? And I just kept inching him up, and I feel like he's going to be really, really important. He's going to be the green dot signal caller. He's, if that one linebacker that's playing in all packages, including dime, is really, really important to your defense. So I agree with you there. And then I had Junior at 18 in my rankings, because I think if this defense gets to the level that they want it to get to, it's going to be Daiyan and it's going to be Junior. And those guys are going to be the starters. And you have Denzel as and Troy Dye as depth. But I go back. I feel like we were watching that practice together, Money, during training camp, where he got into 11 on 11 for the first time, and they were doing the 9 on 7 run, and he just blew up a play in the backfield.
Oh, yeah.
And we looked at each other and we were like, "Yep,
yeah,
all right." And like, my opinion hasn't changed. Like, just because he had a couple injuries and like his rookie season
through training camp,
right, and then the ankle injury during the season, but like, every time I think about, okay, what's Junior Colson going to be, I think about that one play from training camp, and I'm like, okay, that's what he can be. And
I'm not saying he's Patrick Willis. What I am saying is, when you were on a football field standing watching Patrick Willis, you're like, look at that freaking guy.
Yeah.
That's Colson, man. When you're standing there and you see that lower half, you're like, my God. And he's moving like that. Like, that's the sort of physical. And I think it's interesting, that for all of the attention that those D lines get in San Francisco, it's hard to ignore Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner, Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman, like how important that level of the defense is, and was, and sort of got overlooked because all these teams started spreading it out and running 11, and you had to get speed out there. And now just feels like it's swinging back, and you're going to have, 2 linebackers out there, and who knows, maybe 3 in the next couple of years. It's going to get back to that.
Back to base defenses, baby. Right? That's real football.
Exactly. Back to some base defense with how these teams are running it now. But I do think I love seeing both of those guys in there, because I do think that, Ashton Genty on the Raiders, and with the older that Mahomes gets, and just sort of, running games are going to become more and more prevalent, I think, and having those linebackers is going to go a long way.
Yeah, it's the circular nation. I'm combining circular and secular.
Yeah.
Cyclical. Yeah. Circular nature of like offensive football, or I guess like schematics in general in the NFL. Yeah. But what's really interesting is the parallels between Daiyan's career and potentially Junior Colson's career, right? Daiyan came in, pulled his hamstring in that preseason game, was out, had a tough time cracking the lineup after that with injuries. He comes out in year 2 and obviously has a breakout season. Junior Colson, misses time in OTAs with an injury, appendectomy, IR with an ankle injury. When he was on the field, had a tough time really sort of, transitioning and acclimating to the speed of the NFL game. Now he heads into year 2 after a rookie season that was kind of derailed. Does he follow the same path as Daiyan? And I think there's reason to believe that that's like a potential outcome.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. I felt like he was in the conversation as the best linebacker in the draft last year. He was arguably the most important player on a national championship team, and it never fails. It's like, Justin Jackson, right? A guy that never missed a freaking play in his college career, gets to the NFL and is just perennially injured. And hopefully that is obviously not the case.
Those two things could be related.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, you're out there for a lot of snaps. You take a lot of hits, and next thing you know, it's over. Did we miss anything? Anything else that was just kind of? I know it's going to be a lot easier when we get into OTAs, and stuff's going to get a little bit more clear, and we'll have a little bit more to talk about after I see out.
Should we talk about the quarterback?
What do you want to say?
So here's what I wrote. when
Yeah,
obviously
he is your number one guy. Mac was your number two. I remember that.
Derwin 3.
3 was Derwin.
Yeah. And then Mekhi Becton was number 5, by the way.
Yeah. And you had Hampton in the top 10, if I remember right, too.
I think he was 12.
Oh, he was 12. Okay.
Yeah, I had him like fringe top 10. Yeah.
Oh, Ladd. That's right. Ladd was in there.
Ladd was 4, yeah, obviously.
4. Yeah.
I mean, so Ladd is like, what is he going to be able to do when he actually has other pieces around him?
Right.
Like, what are we talking about here?
And
right?
He's not terrified that he's going to get blown to shreds because he's taken so many freaking targets and hits every game. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, he had 197 yards in that Texans game, and he was getting triple covered.
Yeah.
It's like it's easy to let your imagination run wild there as far as what sort of he can be. But yeah, I mean, here's what I wrote with Justin. Like, they got to get back to the playoffs, but like the only talking point around Justin Herbert is going to be, can he win a playoff game until he wins a playoff game? Like that's become what it is. Some of it is fair and some of it's not. I think the way that they lost the 2 playoff games that he played in, especially in Houston, where he played like what I think was, the worst game of his career, but that's sort of it. The big point that I came back to though was like, stay healthy.
Yeah.
Like that's got to be priority number 1. That's the most important thing. Like be out there for all of training camp and avoid some of these hits.
Carolina game.
That's a perfect example, right? Like
The
that
game's
ball
in the
should have been
bag.
out. Exactly. So I think he has to get to a point where he realizes that his availability and being something close to 100% over the course of a season is like the most important thing, because I think that, it has a cascading effect, when the starting quarterback with a new regime and a new offense and all these new pieces misses 3 weeks of training camp. And then by week 2 is, toughing it out with this high ankle sprain, that affected everything about the offense. It affected what they were able to run. It affected the chemistry. It affected the performance, all of it. So that's the key thing for me. Be on the field, all of training camp, avoid some of these injuries that seem a little bit avoidable, and see if you can get this thing to coalesce in a way that it didn't really last season.
Yeah, and I think to me part of that is, and I know some people might think it's counterintuitive, but it's not. I mean, the data bear out that get out there, get defenses on their heels a little bit more so they're not teeing off on you on what was a little bit of a soft interior of the offensive line. Take off and have them, plant seeds of doubt in their brains so they don't have their ears pinned back and they're constantly just firing off the line of scrimmage. And look, a lot of that is that high ankle sprain and health and not being able to run as much as you want, but we know how good he is at it. And, when you're calling a game from the 7th level, it's easier to see it for us than maybe it is for him. But how many of those mesh points where we're like, oh, if you just keep it, man, it's right there. There's 15, 20 yards waiting for you and you're not going to get touched. There's 5, 7 yards. You're not going to get touched. And I feel like, especially with 0 rushing attempts in the wild card game, it's like, that's got to become to me, a much bigger part even. And it's this, we say the same thing, just sprinkle it in. It's not the identity of the offense, but it's a weapon. And it's a weapon that defenses have to prepare for, but you got to do it.
Exactly.
At least a couple, you got to do it. You got to be good at it a few times a game. And that's all it is.
Exactly. It's not necessarily the production. It's the threat. That's what's important. Yeah. But slide.
Yes. Slide, get out of bounds. Don't take on linebackers. Yes. Right. Get down.
We know you're capable of doing it. We
Exactly.
don't need to see it again. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is like when you're running a mesh with Omarion Hampton and he's, and this run game is now working and everyone's biting on that. My gosh, the opportunities are going to be there compared to years past and what the running game was, if this running game can be what it is. We had a question on one of them that was like, oh, what can Justin do better? And I said, look, we're nitpicking. It's Justin Herbert. He's incredible at everything. I said, but if it's one thing, I think you just got to keep that ball a little bit more on those option plays and take off because it's there. And if it's there, I assume you're seeing it in film, later in the week. And it's like, yeah, dude, just take a few of those. Yeah. And I think that helps Greg Roman out a lot. And that's the other thing with Roman, for all the incoming he took, like just think about what he did with Will Dissly and what he's done in his career with these tight ends. And now you bring in Conklin, who I know isn't George Kittle or Sam Laporta, but he's a good receiving tight end with really good hands, and he's a really good red zone target. And now you bring in an athlete like Oronde Gadsden, and like, okay, now you feel like with these big backs, Greg's got some things he can cook with, and I'm anxious to see what he's able to do with it.
Yeah. I imagine we're going to see a much more explosive offense, both in the run game and obviously the pass game. They just what they were missing last year in the passing game was like, okay, nothing's open. They got caught with a man beater against the zone look. Okay, what happens now? Where can Justin go with the football? And he needs that option.
Nothing.
Just let him chuck it down the sideline, one-on-one to somebody that can go make a play, right? And they just didn't have that guy last year. Obviously, they bring back the guy that's done it for the Chargers better than anybody in Mike Williams, but Trey Harris is that type of guy. Give him an option when everything sort of breaks down to use his arm talent, throw it downfield, and maybe you're able to make some 50-50 plays that they weren't able to make last year.
Yeah, I just, you think about the Houston game and, he chucks that ball down to Quentin and you could see it. The second it left his hand, you're like, this is terrible. this is, this is not it. I know Quentin was not even turned around yet. He was just kind of running straight. The DB is already reading it. I think it was Lassiter, if I remember right. And it was just like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And so you get a guy like Mike and Trey Harris that we've seen. It was supposed to be DJ Chark last year, and it just wasn't. And so it's, And that's the thing with Mike, too. He's, now you're 2 years removed from an injury that for a guy that size that needs that explosiveness to be what he is, it's 2 years removed. I think that's going to go a long way than 1 year removed from a guy that's in his, whatever it was, 7th, 8th, 9th season. So,
yeah. Also, you're going from a quarterback who says you have to be on the red line to make the catch versus a quarterback in Justin Herbert who's doing what Mike asks, which is just throw it up there, bro.
Yeah.
Just throw it up there. And Justin is not afraid to do that to Mike Williams. And that chemistry is already built in. It's the proof of concept is there. You don't have to imagine it. Just go, pull up some Mike Williams highlights and you'll see it.
And I would say to that gentleman, if he's not on the red line, just throw it to the red line then, instead of 4 yards behind him, because you didn't throw it to the red line either. So whatever you were looking for and whatever you were doing, it just did not compute. All right. I think that's probably good. Appreciate it, dude. That was fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Give it to me again. Substack.
Yeah. hopsandpop.substack.com. You can go sign up for free with your email, get access to all of the live streams. All the recaps are on there. And then you can listen to Hops and Pop on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. Just search Hops and Pop and it'll be there. We're doing a stream tonight, so there'll be a new episode out tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Right on. Do that and then subscribe to The Athletic. It's great stuff. Always appreciate it, man. You're the best.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Money.
All right, we'll be back next week, OTAs, and likely another coordinator. I think we're chasing down either Greg Roman or Ryan Ficken, since we already got Coach Minter out of the way. So we get one of those two next week. So be sure to keep an eye out next Thursday/Friday, depending on how you're consuming this. Appreciate y'all. Like, rate, review, add a comment. We always try to engage with those on YouTube as well. Thanks again to Daniel Popper, and thanks for watching Chargers Weekly.